Fellas, there are some fighters in the UFC that right now honestly look unbeatable. Like, you can't imagine them ever losing a fight soon because they've just been looking amazing. So I've got a tier list of S tier, which is practically they are unbeatable in the UFC. And then D tier being they're pretty hard to beat, but compared to the rest of the people on this list, I won't call them unbeatable. But yeah, the most unbeatable fighters currently in the UFC. Let me know if I missed anyone out because I'm sure there's a lot. But starting off with the first fighter, we got Tom Aspinall. Now, I feel like with Aspinall, he is... I'm going to put him in A tier, but I feel like Aspinall is like one of those fighters that if you were to create a fighter on like a UFC video game and max out all the stats, Aspinall would be the result. He's quick on his feet. He's the fastest heavyweight right now. Super athletic as well for a heavyweight. Hits hard. He's an S tier on the feet. He just saw knockout Pavlovich and Marcin Tybura. He's been grappling his whole life. Great grappler. One of the most well-rounded fighters in the division. He's got slick defense as well. Aspinall is the perfect fighter, but the reason I put him in A tier and not S tier is because he's in the heavyweight division. And I know it's kind of unfair to judge him based on things we haven't seen yet, but he does leave his chin up in the air. And in the heavyweight division, it's one of those divisions, and I guess you could say this about every fighter, but anything can happen. And I feel like Aspinall, if he has like a 5-year reign, there's got to be some point where he gets caught with a big shot and gets dropped. Even if I do think he's the most skilled heavyweight on the roster, because he's in the heavyweight division, there's got to be a time when he gets caught by a big shot and knocked out. Because in the heavyweight division, it's like a whole new sport. Anything can happen. Skill-wise, he's an S-tier fighter, but because of the division he's in, I'm going to have to stick him in A-tier because it's the heavyweight division. You match up Aspinall against Derek Lewis right now. Aspinall has the tools to win every single time. He's infinitely better. But because it's Derek Lewis and it's the heavyweight division, one big shot and Aspinall's lights could be out. So I'm going to put him in A tier. I do think at least one point in his UFC career, if he keeps fighting regularly, he will get caught with a big shot. But that's not because Aspinall's bad. That's just because it's the heavyweight division. And if you're in this division for long enough, you're bound to get caught eventually. Next fighter we've got is Jon Jones. And I'm going to put Jon Jones, I'm going to put him in B tier. I know there's going to be people salty about this because, oh, he's the champion, he's the greatest of all time. This has nothing to do with him being the greatest. If we look at Jon Jones right now, I think there's a few fighters that beat Jon Jones. I think Aspinall finishes Jon Jones within a few rounds. I think Curtis Blades and Pavlovich could give him a good fight. Everyone else in that heavyweight division, Jones probably beats. I even think he beats like a guy like Pereira who's going to come up to the division. So Jones is definitely one of the best in the UFC and he deserves that top 3 pound-for-pound ranking spot. And like I said, he's never lost a fight in his life. Like, you've got to give him that as well. But I do think that Jones, because he'd lose to Aspinall, who's also in the same division as him, and I think that Blades would give him a run for his money, so would Pavlovich, and he looked really stiff on the feet against Cyril Gane. I'm going to have to put him in B tier. He's practically unbeatable against the majority of the roster, but it's not like there's nobody in the UFC that can beat Jon Jones right now. A lot of people think Aspinall beats him, and even like I said, if you take away Aspinall, there's guys like Pavlovich, there's guys like Curtis Blades that you can also say beat him. So as of right now, I think Jones is B tier. Very, very, very difficult to beat, and there's a select few fighters that can beat Jon Jones, but the majority of them get absolutely battered by him and finished. So I'll put Jones in B tier. I've got to respect him, but I wouldn't say he's unbeatable. And don't confuse greatest for best. A lot of people do that. They hear me say that I don't think Jones is the best, and they think I'm discrediting his legacy. No, he's got the greatest legacy. Skill-wise right now, I don't think he's the best, and I don't think he's completely unbeatable. So for Jones, I'm going to go B tier. Then we've got Ilia Topuria. I'm also going to put Ilia Topuria in B tier. Now, the reason he's in B tier is because we need to see more from Ilia Topuria recently. We've just seen him beat one of the best fighters in the UFC in Alexander Volkanovski and in such an impressive fashion. Before that, he was beating, obviously, Josh Emmett, Bryce Mitchell, and he's looked insanely sharp. But I think I need to see more from Topuria before I say that he's completely unbeatable. I need to see how he does against a guy like Holloway. He's also been caught in a lot. Well, I say a lot. He got caught in the fight with Jai Herbert as well, where he nearly got knocked out, which ain't good when your opponent's Jai Herbert. But then again, that was a move to the lightweight division. I do think he's beatable. I do think Topuria is beatable. I don't think Topuria... it wouldn't shock me if a guy like Holloway was to beat Ilia Topuria. And I just think there's other guys in the division we need to see Topuria against. We need to see him against guys like Evloev. I know he's faced grapplers in the past in Ryan Hall and, like I said, Bryce Mitchell. But I need to see him against different styles. I need to see him against an Evloev, Max Holloway. I need to see him against guys like that. Maybe even an Arnold Allen and a Yair Rodriguez. I think it's a little bit too soon to say that he's completely unbeatable when he's not even had a single title defense. But if he goes out there, and if he can beat a guy like Holloway or even an Evloev, you know what? I might move him up to A tier with Aspinall. Maybe even put him above Aspinall because he's in the featherweight division. But yeah, Topuria, it's really hard to say that there's a fighter that definitely beats him. I'd say the toughest matchup for Topuria is Holloway, and even that's a 50-50 fight. So very tricky to beat Topuria. I'll put him in B tier for now. Next fighter we've got is Leon Edwards. For Leon Edwards, another Brit. I'm gonna put Edwards. I'll put him in B tier. I'll also put him in B tier. There's a lot of fighters on B tier here. Leon Edwards, he's looked good recently, but it's not like he's been going out there and absolutely demolishing opponents. He's kind of been scraping victories. I'd say the Covington one was a fair, clear win to Edwards, but it's Colby Covington at the end of the day. He hasn't looked great in his last couple of fights. The Usman fights is what put him on this list. To beat a guy like Kamaru Usman, especially when he was pound for pound #1 at the time, was insane. But I wouldn't say Leon Edwards is, like, completely unbeatable. I wouldn't say you look at Leon Edwards and think, oh my gosh, there's nobody in the UFC that beats this guy. I mean, you got to remember, he did kind of get dominated in the second fight with Kamaru Usman, the rematch with Kamaru Usman before the head kick knockout. He got rocked by Nate Diaz as well, which is something that's not ideal. I also think a guy like Shavkat Rakhmonov could beat him, and JDM. I'm not saying they would beat him, but I think it could happen, and it wouldn't, you know, absolutely surprise me if Leon Edwards was to lose to one of those guys. But, again, with that being said, I don't think there's definitely a fighter in the UFC right now that I can say beat Leon Edwards. I think if Makhachev was to move up to the welterweight division, I think Leon beats him there. I think Leon definitely has the capability to beat Shavkat, JDM, definitely Bilal. I think he's got the capability to rule the welterweight division for a long time, so I'm going to put him in B tier for now, but I wouldn't say Leon Edwards is completely unbeatable. He's not like, you know, he's not got all the attributes. He's got a very point fighty style, which works because that's his style, but I'll put him in B tier for now. Definitely not completely unbeatable. Then we've got Alexander Volkanovski, guy who just lost to Ilia Topuria. I'm going to put him in C tier. I can't really put him anything above C tier considering his last couple of fights. He goes out there at UFC 284, loses to Islam Makhachev, in which was an insanely close fight, and, you know, it was a move up to the lightweight division. Dominates Yair Rodriguez. Then he gets knocked out cold by Islam Makhachev in that fight at UFC 294, which obviously wasn't great to lose to Makhachev in that fashion. And then goes out there, UFC 298, to Ilia Topuria, and then gets knocked out by a featherweight and loses his featherweight belt. So he's not unbeatable. He's just lost to Ilia Topuria and Islam Makhachev, so he can't be unbeatable. But I can't really put him anything lower than C tier because he's lost to two champions who were two current champions in the UFC. This guy's pretty much ruled the featherweight division for the longest time, getting wins over Holloway 3 times, Brian Ortega, Korean Zombie as well. This massive list of contenders that he's just destroyed. Yair Rodriguez, like I just said, Jose Aldo. He's got such a long list of featherweights that he's beaten, and he is arguably the greatest featherweight of all time with Aldo. So I can't put him anything below a C tier, higher than a C tier, but below a C tier. But at the same time, he's definitely beatable. Like, I even think, and this might sound delusional, but if you put him in there with a guy like Josh Emmett, even that's a dangerous matchup for Volkanovski, because if Josh Emmett just lands one of those, big shots, that's dangerous for Alexander Volkanovski. I'm going to put him in C tier. Prime Volkanovski probably A tier, but right now, I'm going to have to put him in C tier. He's been beaten a lot recently, and he's getting old, so yeah. Volkanovski C tier. Then we've got Shavkat, a potential opponent of Leon Edwards. For Shavkat, I'm also going to put him in C tier. Now, his resume so far is insanely impressive. Obviously, everyone knows he's undefeated and he's finished every single fighter he's ever faced. 100% finish rate. He can TKO you. He can submit you. He can do pretty much everything in Shavkat. And he's coming off an impressive win over Wonderboy Thompson and before that, Jeff Neal. But again, similar to Topuria, I need to see way more from Shavkat Rakhmonov before I call him unbeatable. I think Leon Edwards, like I said, has the capability to beat him. I think JDM has the capability to beat him. I think even Bilal Muhammad could beat this guy. Also, I've seen a lot of holes in his striking game. His head movement isn't great. He's not the cleanest boxer on the feet. I think his stand-up could be improved a lot. But because he's undefeated, he's had a great run in the UFC and in his entire MMA career. And he's looking like he's the next hot prospect or hot contender now for Leon Edwards. I'll put him in C tier, but yeah, it's way too early to call him unbeatable when we haven't really seen him against a high-level opponent. Yeah, and I know Wonderboy was high level, but I'm talking like a top contender. I need to see him against a top contender. Then we've got Islam Makhachev. Islam Makhachev is S tier. I can't see any single fighter right now in the UFC lightweight division or even the lightweight division in MMA as a whole who beats Islam Makhachev. I would favour Islam Makhachev against everyone. Even stylistic problems like Arman Sarukian and Michael Chandler, I think Makhachev gets it done. Makhachev is the best fighter in the UFC, and I think he deserves to be pound for pound #1. He's the best. Knocking out Alexander Volkanovski, one of the best strikers at the time. Submitting Charles Oliveira, one of the best submission artists at the time. And I really do think he's going to go on a long run at 155. People were saying that Khabib Nurmagomedov is S tier, unbeatable, 29-0, whatever. Islam Makhachev's better than Khabib. He's basically Khabib Nurmagomedov if you turned his striking, it like turned him into a demon on the feet. Islam Makhachev is an amazing wrestler, probably the best in the UFC right now with his grappling, and his striking is improving and he's got dangerous knockout power. Yeah, Islam beats, in my opinion, unless he gets caught with a big shot, which has happened to him before, he beats every single lightweight on the roster. I can't see anyone beating Islam Makhachev anytime soon. I think he's going to retire as the greatest lightweight of all time. Islam Makhachev, I've got to put him in S tier. It would be rude to not put Makhachev in S tier, despite what you think about him. Then we've got a guy coming off the most recent win right now, Alex Pereira. Yeah, Pereira's looked insane in his last few fights. I'm going to put him in C tier. That might be quite low for a few of you, but I want to see Pereira against a stylistic problem. I want to see Pereira if he can beat Magomed Ankalaev. And I think if he can beat Magomed Ankalaev, I'd probably move him up to B tier above guys like Edwards. But Pereira, you've got to take into account, he's fought in the middleweight division and the light heavyweight division, not the most competitive divisions in the UFC. He's been knocked out by Israel Adesanya before. He's struggled in grappling in a lot of his fights, the Jan Blachowicz fight specifically, the Yuri fight, even the Adesanya fight, the first one in the UFC. But I've got to include him on this list because he's taken out contender after contender, or former champions now. He's taken out Jamal Hill, Yuri Prohaska, which was insane, but I don't think Pereira's completely unbeatable. To be honest with you, even though, people might disagree with this, I think Ankalaev, I probably favour Ankalaev against Pereira. I think Pereira loses to most guys in the heavyweight division. He gets squashed by John Jones and Tom Aspinall, which is no shame because they're a division above him and he's already fought in 2 completely different weight classes and won a belt. Yuri Prohaska gives him a tough fight. But I'm going to have to put Pereira in C tier. He's definitely beatable. But you put him against a heavy grappler who's got decent fight IQ, and I think he loses. Maybe it's too early to say that. Maybe I actually need to see that him against a high-level grappler, not just another striker. But right now, Pereira, definitely one of the best in the UFC. But right now, I've got to put him in C tier. Let's see how he does against Ankalaev. Then we've got Pantoja. Pantoja, for me, I'll put him in B tier. Maybe I'll probably put him at the top of B tier, to be honest. But yeah, Pantoja, he's looked great. He's on an absolute streak. And if he can get past Steve Erceg, kind of similar to Islam Makhachev and Tom Aspinall, I don't think there's anybody that beats Pantoja anytime soon, unless Brandon Moreno, gets another title shot, which, I mean, he just lost to Roy Val, so he's not going to do. But unless Moreno gets another title shot and beats him. Now, Pantoja, I'm not going to say he has the same effect of Islam Makhachev, where he looks completely unbeatable. He does start to slow down in the later rounds. He's got a lot of holes in his game. He's had quite close fights, like I said, the one with Moreno, but the fact that he's making guys like Moreno and Roy Val look like just another fight, who were practically the best in the flyweight division, I think he beats a lot of them. I think he could destroy Muhammad Mokaev if you think of it stylistically. The rest of the contenders he's either beaten or I think he beats. I think Steve Erceg's a problem in the later rounds, but if we can get past Steve Erceg, man, it's hard to say that anyone beats Pantoja in the flyweight division, because right now, he looks like he's going to be ruling the division for a long time. So, for Pantoja, let's see how it is at 301, but right now I've got to put him up to B tier. Definitely one of the best in the pound for pound. You know what? I think he's been quite disrespected. To have Dricus du Plessis above Pantoja in the pound for pound rankings is a disgrace. Dricus has just won the belt in arguably a robbery. Pantoja's just destroyed a bunch of flyweights. Pantoja should be above Dricus. And talking to Dricus, D tier. Now, don't be disrespected if you're a Dricus fan. Don't be offended. This is compared to the rest of the roster. Being on a D tier in this list still means that you're practically unbeatable compared to the rest of the roster. But as a champion, I can't say that Dricus du Plessis is unbeatable. He's looked like he's about to lose in every single one of his fights. The Sean Strickland fight was arguably a loss, right? Even fights like Darren Till, Derek Brunson, Brad Tavares, he's going life and death against those guys. And it looked like one extra round of him not finishing the opponents and he would have died. Dricus doesn't look perfect. He's got a really weird style. He's had cardio issues in the past. He's never having like super dominating fights. And I think Dricus du Plessis, even though it's working for him, which is why he's on this list, he's not unbeatable. I think he's definitely going to get beaten by, well, not definitely, but I think he could get beaten by a guy like Adesanya or Cannonier. So for Dricus du Plessis, I'll put him in D tier. But that is my list of the most beatable fighters in the UFC. We've got Makhachev in S tier, and then the rest of the fighters on the list. Let me know your thoughts on this list, and like I said at the beginning, if I should have included anyone else. But I think this is a pretty accurate list. For some of the fighters, we need to just see a little bit more from like guys like Topuria and Shavkat. But yeah, that's my list of the most unbeatable fighters in the UFC. Thank you for watching.